On August 30th, 2019, an eerie teaser trailer is released for an anime adapting one of the greatest horror manga of all time and my favorite book of all time, Uzumaki. Written by one of the greatest horror mangaka of all time, Junji Ito, who's known for his disturbing imagery associated with cosmic horror and body horror, with many of his works' images entering the mainstream in the United States in the last 10 years or so, and many of his works making up the display shelves at your local Barnes & Noble, Hot Topic, or filling up the sample books at your local tattoo shop. With the initial teaser for Uzumaki, there's a plan to have the entire series directed by legendary director Hiroshi Nagahama, best known for his work on the deeply upsetting adaptation of Flowers of Evil. And all throughout the teaser, it's also hard to ignore the otherworldly instrumentation on the saxophone from none other than Colin Stetson, who you probably all know from the recent acclaim that he got at the time for his score on Hereditary. We also see flashes of images from the manga hinting at some of the more iconic reveals of the series, before we're presented with extraordinarily fluid animation hinting at the love and care guiding the intention of this project. And when reflecting on the previous adaptations of Ito's work, it feels like for once the tone feels perfect. I can't wait to see this next year. Before we get any deeper into this, I do want to give a preface and a disclaimer. I don't blame any of the lower level animators on this project, even though I'm going to be talking about the animation extensively. I don't blame any of them. This is a management issue. And while I have a couple of friends who really did enjoy this series, or at least tolerate it, I hated the Uzumaki animation. To me, and this is no exaggeration, this felt like a desecration of the sacred text. It's a project that I envy no animator or producer to have to work on due to the nearly unattainable expectations surrounding this series, and even still then, I don't feel like they were nearly reached by the final product. And to me, it's all the more personally upsetting considering how close to perfection that first episode gets. I think it's the closest we've ever gotten to perfectly adapting Uzumaki, but then it falls apart so quickly it makes me want to try and understand what exactly happened here. And in order to do that, we need to do a deep dive on the first two episodes of the series and the drop-off in animation that happens between episode 1 and also episode 2, what I really love about the animation episode 1 and the techniques that are being used there, and also why does episode 1 work so well as an adaptation while the other episodes don't. And yes, that does mean I do need to give some brief spoilers. I won't be spoiling the entire manga. I think it's best left to experience if you just read it yourself. I will be giving full spoilers though for chapters 1, 2, and also chapter 7, which is the Jack in the Box chapter if you haven't read it in some time. I also want to piece together a production timeline kind of showing what exactly happened from the first trailer announced to all the production notes that we got to all the behind the scenes footage to every single trailer and update that we did get, because I think there's some patterns that people aren't piecing together, and I feel like something really kind of shifted in my viewpoint when I watched everything in order. If you're enjoying what you're seeing so far, consider liking, subscribing, follow me on Letterboxd if you want to see my opinions about other movies. I watch mostly queer movies, horror movies, international movies, but I watch a bit of everything. I also share a lot of personally what's going on Instagram and Blue Sky. I know it's not Twitter, and also just follow me on TikTok. I post there daily. I assume making my first video that most people will just kind of find me from there. It turns out I have a whole new audience now of people that are seeing me for the first time, and that's kind of wild, so thank you all. And also I'd love to know if you're a fan of Junji Ito, what is your favorite manga from him, and also what did you think about the Uzumaki anime overall? For those that don't know, Uzumaki follows two teenagers, Kiri and Shuichi, in a small Japanese town where nearly all the inhabitants lose their mind at the sight of spirals before it grows into an all-consuming obsession, which unfortunately befalls Shuichi's father as he becomes the first of many victims of this curse. And what we quickly realize is spirals can appear everywhere. We can have them be present in the art we create, the fish cakes in our ramen, our hair can be in a spiral bun, the cochlea in our ears are spiral shaped, and snails too. And by having this be a focus, Junji Ito has created a horror that can be found in the everyday and seemingly unexplainable way that consumes all of us with no way out because we just keep going deeper and deeper and deeper inside this spiral. It is a fairly simple premise that leads to one of the most tense and anxiety-inducing manga I've ever read, and honestly, again, it's my favorite book of all time, just period. Immediately, the first episode opens with us in the quiet whispers of the town, Korozucho, which is also known as Black Vortex Town in English. I'm sorry, what is the name of the town? That is absolutely ridiculous. Why is no one questioning this fascination with spirals, despite this being the name of the town? I know it's a manga, I know it's kind of, this fantasy logic. It's very goofy. I just want to say it's very goofy. Anyways, we're introduced to Kiri, one of our two protagonists for this series, and we're presented with a level of luscious and fluid animation that I've been anticipating. It's all due to the animation technique called rotoscoping, where animators draw over scenes using real-life actors and creates a movement that feels, well, more human. It's been famously used all over the history of animation and film, including some of Disney's earliest animated projects, including Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, the Superman shorts of the 40s, the Beatles' Yellow Submarine, A Scanner Darkly directed by Richard Linklater, who you probably all know from the Before trilogy, Boyhood, or School of Rock, and more importantly, Flowers of Evil, the 2013 anime that likely made Hiroshi Nagahama the ideal choice for Junji Ito for this project, and honestly, when I read about this project, this was the only choice that he had in mind for the project. Rotoscoping is also an animation style that feels quite controversial to some fans, which also affected some aspects of the reception of Flowers of Evil, which some people tend to not like the art style because its hyper-realistic presentation comes off as off-putting and ironically evoking something unnaturalistic overall. I know some of that reception speaking to others online about the Uzumaki anime, even with just that first episode released, but seeing that largely with those, including myself, really loving the animation style because it gave such a disturbing and eerie kind of flow to even some of the most innocuous scenes of the series. The sense of hyperrealism ultimately makes everything that happens in Uzumaki feel all the more, well, real. Another detail that adds to the overall quality of the anime's first episode is the use of movement in the background in order to convey depth and dimension to a scene, which can be highlighted in a few ways. But I love to see it in the first few minutes of the episode where Shuichi and Kiri are speaking and we can see the wind flowing in the background. Now let's talk about how the positioning and everything happening here really adds depth to these characters, at least in the way that they're drawn. And when looking at specifically the depth provided by this animation, I really love the placement of both of these characters, with both not being level on the x-axis of the drawing, and then we get some details of wind in the background, with another burst of wind in the foreground moving with different timing. And even if the two bursts of wind are small details that are in the background and the foreground, by having Kiri and Shuichi kind of being distanced from one another, it adds a lot of depth to a very simple scene, and really just show how strong the animation was from the very beginning. It adds a lot of quality to a scene that might feel inconsequential outside of context, but really does add kind of a lot of context to everything that's going to happen moving forward, especially with Shuichi's father. And as the scene goes on, we see the same level of consistent animation as we're learning more details about what happens with Shuichi's father and the spirals. We see Kiri in the background attempting to blink her eyes while Shuichi is talking. And all throughout the first episode, I felt we received this quality of animation or more, regardless if it was adapting the story of Shuichi's father or the story about Azami, the girl at the high school with the crescent-shaped scar on her forehead, which, well, if you trace along a crescent and you eventually let it spiral inwards, you eventually get, well, a spiral. I don't watch nearly as much anime as I did back in my Toonami days in elementary school and middle school, but I can't deny this sole episode feels like such a standout amongst an industry that's overworked, exploited, and constantly under crunch. Yes, I know there's a lot of beautifully animated anime out there. Right now I'm currently watching Dragon Ball Daima, and I know that show is gorgeous. It's not even the best looking show out there. But even if you have a best-selling manga, even if you are well received, that doesn't mean that you're going to have a stellar looking anime anymore, especially with the way that the anime industry has shifted over the last 5 years. I am not blaming animators in the beginning of this video and wanting to shift blame to management because the anime industry, while always having these issues, has shifted so much since the announcement of the Uzumaki anime 5 years ago and however long it was in production before that. In a New York Times article examining the issue titled "Anime is Booming, so why are animators living in poverty?", low-level animators were said to be making as little as $200 a month, with another animator interviewed for the piece making somewhere between $1,400 and $3,800 a month, a wildly fluctuating number. And that has also required him to work every single waking moment of his life, and at 29 he feels unable to start a family or get married. And in a 2019 study cited for this article, while key animators on an anime show might make about $36,000, in the United States that level of animator typically makes $65,000 to $75,000 depending on what the series is. And to go back to what exacerbated this existing issue, it's exactly the same problem that caused the initial day of the Uzumaki anime, the COVID pandemic. With everyone at home, people were suddenly binging more episodes of television shows than possible, including anime trying to avoid their work, school, and overall stress of the world feeling hopeless at the time, and that created a demand for just more anime. With no one having any idea about the timeline of the invention of the COVID vaccines, there's no clarity around when live-action performers would be able to return to sets, causing the focus to shift to animation shortly. There's an increased demand and increased output leading to a sharp decline in quality without any meaningful shift in the number of animators present in the industry, leading to questionable quality with even some of the most acclaimed or anticipated of shows. A great example of this is Blue Lock, which, if you aren't familiar, is a sports manga and anime about football, or soccer as it's called just in the United States. It's become the highest selling manga of 2023 with 10.5 million copies sold. This is wild not only considering the fact that this is a sports manga, but also considering the fact that Shueisha, the company behind Dragon Ball, One Piece, and Jujutsu Kaisen, has dominated the charts for the last 20 years. And well, here's how the second season of Blue Lock has looked so far. I mean, football is one of the most dynamic, exciting, and energetic sports of all time, and the show has been reduced to using CGI animation that blends inorganically with the rest of the show, still still images in the middle of games where characters speak to one another and the world freezes, and thick lines in the animation, which I just personally really hate. That's not really a sign of bad animation. It's unfortunate in just one show that's been affected negatively by the practices in the anime industry. If this is how the most popular manga of 2023 is getting its anime treatment, 1, nothing is safe, and 2, imagine how lesser selling titles are treated in the anime process. I thought it was really necessary to give this present background on the anime industry so that way you can understand how a show can look so different from season to season, or even from a really important arc to a filler arc, or even from episode to episode, because there's also different teams involved with each episode. And so that way you can understand the dramatic shift that happens between the first episode of Uzumaki and everything that follows. And now, to the credit of the quality of the second episode, it appears that some form of rotoscoping is used for parts of the episode, particularly with the part with the snail man person. But let's shift to a scene further in the episode where Kiri and her friend are walking alongside the cemetery. 1, clearly no form of rotoscoping is taking place in this scene. And 2, Kiri's face appears completely different in different shots. It's not because of a shift in perspective. I truly don't believe her face is being drawn very consistently from this point forward, especially with the shape of her face appearing longer to me depending on this shot, but again, that could be a poor judgment on my end. Regardless, the scene in the cemetery feels like a sharp contrast to the scene we had in episode 1 of Kiri and Shuichi speaking, because we start getting static backgrounds with no depth or dimension as the camera pans, and this later shot as they walk away from this boy, it looks like Kiri and her friend are walking on a flat plane away from the boy. They are clearly walking away from him, the background image cues you into that, but why are they not shifting in size or position as they move away? And as we shift a few more minutes in, I feel the character lines feel so undefined at this point, and proportions continue to be off. Jumping forward, the scene with Kiri's suitor Yamaguchi highlights not only my issues with the pacing, but also how Uzumaki as an adaptation misses the tone of the original manga. Now, the original Uzumaki manga is 19 chapters, plus a bonus chapter that was not adapted in this anime. Kiri's suitor is adapted from the 7th chapter of this story called Jack in the Box. Now, this boy is the same boy from the beginning of the story in the cemetery. It makes sense that he's there, but everything has been adapted out of order. Of the 4 episodes of Uzumaki, the first episode adapts chapters 1, parts of 2, 3, parts of 8, or 2 full chapters and parts of 2 other chapters. The second episode adapts 5, parts of 6, parts of 7, parts of 8, 9, or 2 full chapters and parts of 3 other chapters. Episode 3 adapts parts of 2, 7, and the whole chapters of 4, 10, 11, 12, 13, or 5 whole chapters and parts of 2 other chapters. Episode 4 adapts chapters 14 through 19, or 6 full chapters. Each episode has grown uncomfortable in scope, and while the first episode of Uzumaki isn't a true adaptation of the Uzumaki anime and adapts the first 3 chapters out of order, I do also feel like it doesn't really cut into the tension of each one of those segments, and also when looking at episode 2 and everything beyond, everything is far more messy, everything is far less tactful, and everything loses the tone that's so great about the original Uzumaki manga. When reading the majority of horror manga from Junji Ito, you'll be presented with panels that feel typical to any other manga of other genres. Like most other manga, you'll be presented with characters and dialogue, and you'll feel intrigue as you're getting deeper into this narrative, but as you begin to turn the next page, you are presented with an entire solitary panel eclipsing the page in front of you, either providing a shocking reveal or a disturbing scare, such as the audience learning the extent of Shuichi's father becoming obsessed with the spirals. This is obviously a big reveal. I can't quite show some of the disturbing scares that are in this because I'm not really sure if it'll get my video flagged or not because they're that gross. It is a slow burn that will take place for pages and pages and pages, and bam, we are slapped in the face. In the case of the Jack in the Box chapter, time is taken for us to get to know this character and have him encounter Kiri after she's cut her hair, for him to get hit by a car to impress her, to the Jack in the Box scare, to the zombie jump scare of this character. It's a chapter of 32 pages, one that I can imagine to be stretched the entirety of an episode or half an episode, but instead is disjointed and all the emphasis is placed on the reveal and the jump scares and not recognizing the tension needed to get there. I don't think adapting these chapters in order episode by episode is a necessity, but when the tension is killed, which I felt somewhat in the first episode, before truly escalating in episode 2, you're really doing a disservice to that original manga. And truly, I felt it getting worse and worse by episode, even if the animation quality for episode 3 and 4 was a bit better than episode 2. And while so minor, by missing that tension, you relegate everything to a simple jump scare. None of this feels nearly as great as the work by Junji Ito, especially when you consider the fact that one of these episodes, episode 2, has a post-credit scene that shows one of these reveals that feels completely tacked on at the end of it, and completely breaks up the tension of everything that happens in chapter 7. And yes, I completely forgot this until editing this video. Actually, this entire chapter isn't adapted until we get to the end of chapter 3, where again we have a final reveal. I saw someone on Reddit actually talking about how absurdly structured this entire series is and focus entirely on episode 2, and I really want to break this down for you. This person on Reddit named that we open with Kiri's hair spiraling and also the student turning into a snail, which are adapting 2 different chapters from this overall narrative. We then shift back into the Jack in the Box subplot, jump jump back to the snail plot. Kiri and her classmate have their epic hair fight, and then we get the snail plot again, and then we have the students attempting to leave the town, and then we're introduced to the lighthouse. These are 5 different parts or 5 different chapters of the original manga that, again, some of them are not even all adapted for this one episode. Also, I do have to name this viral moment here where people really understood that the Uzumaki anime fell apart. It's a similar issue to the one that I was highlighting from earlier in the episode, but it almost feels like the animators created a gif of people running and then dragged them along in the background, and again, didn't factor how these characters should look after moving and how their perspective and size should change. The same goes for this monstrosity right here. The animation quality in the 3rd and 4th episode continue to oscillate back and forth, with some of the rotoscoping present that was seen in the 1st episode, with some of it looking really strong, and then in the 4th episode it just devolves into something else. Now you have an idea of how the animation quality devolved, my thoughts about the tone and how this adapted the overall Uzumaki anime, and some of the issues that have happened over the last 5 years in the anime industry. I do think it's really important to try and understand what exactly changed with this production as time went on. And again, I'm seeing so many people scapegoat David Zaslav, and again, I think it's fair to critique him. I think there's a lot of issues with him as a CEO and what he does to animation overall, but there is so much more going on here, and I wish we were looking at the bigger story. But before I share my final guess about what I think happened with this production, I want to craft a timeline about what was shared with us at different points and what exactly happened when we got this final product in this television show. So first off, let's go back to this initial teaser. We have the original story and art by Junji Ito, which, yeah, there's no way to change that. Shortly after this, we see director Hiroshi Nagahama, which received a ton of hype when this was announced, and then he only ever storyboarded the 4 episodes of the show and has a direction credit on the 1st episode as series director, with Yuji Moriyama taking over as series director for episodes 2 and 3, and then we have no series director for episode 4. Now I checked this over and over again, looking through those end credits, verifying with people online. There is no series director for episode 4. That is not a mistake. And to give some clarification on how this series evolved, I do want to explain what these different titles mean, at least in the context of this one television show. So Hiroshi Nagahama was announced as series director. This is similar as a showrunner for an American television show, or someone who's in charge of the entire production, making sure that everyone stays on track, episodes stay cohesive, all those fun little things that make sure that we enjoy the continuity of everything that we're seeing in front of us. Also for this series, there's also an episode director who's in charge of the individual production of each episode, because in the world of anime, there may be months or in a more rushed production, weeks spent on an individual episode, and there's an inability to focus on the series as a whole because multiple episodes may be going on at once. Now, in the grand scheme of things, not having a consistent series director for a series that's only 4 episodes long feels really unusual to me. And then not having a series director listed at all for your final episode, and having 5 different episodic directors listed for this episode, including 2 of which that are companies, is beyond concerning to me. As for announcements regarding the series in that initial teaser, Colin Stetson was still credited as the composer for that final production, who was easily a bright spot across all 4 episodes, and while studio production IG was still credited on the final series, it also ended up being a co-production with William Street, Adult Swim's in-house production team. And while Anime Studio Drive was initially announced to be attached to the series, we later got Akatsuki and Fugaku attached to the show. This might be a bit of a controversial take because of all the issues happening in the anime industry. You know, if there's an anime studio that you really love from the 2000s or even the 2010s that did really fantastic work, because of a rush production, they might not have the same stellar level of animation that you expect from their production, so I don't really think it's important to focus on that quality right there. There's a lot of people who are really great in this industry who are just vastly overworked, even if they're from a no-name company. And you might be wondering exactly what happened after this point, and I just have to say simply COVID. On March 25th, 2020, Jason DeMarco, co-founder of Toonami, said the production was still on track and the pandemic had no effect on the production, which of course was not true. No one really understood at that point how COVID would transform daily life. In an interview released May 9th, 2020 with Junji Ito on Crunchyroll, he shared that the screenplay was completed. Because this was a live interview setup, I can strongly assume this was recorded pre-lockdown. This is also where it's reiterated that the series will be 4 episodes, and Ito makes the comment that it's shorter than the original manga and they did a great job of rearranging the series, hinting at some of the liberties taken with the story. And here's where we get the first kernel that really unpacks a lot of my theories about what happened with this production. Junji Ito also mentions that someone dies early on that has a much larger role in the story going on. Now, while I can't find any source that confirms this at all, and this is all speculation from me and other people online, many people assume that Junji Ito is talking about Shuichi's father. I feel this is even hinted at in this interview because they do show a clip of the smoke cloud or the ash cloud that we see of Shuichi's father after he's cremated, but again, this is just speculation, but he's also, again, the only character that I feel like is significant enough that his presence being alive would actually radically shift the story. On July 26, 2020, an interview with Hiroshi Nagahama is released, giving updates on how COVID has affected the production, speaking on the script being completed, Nagahama locking in and completing the storyboards, reiterating the changes that will happen, and naming a delay to 2021 for the project. Makes sense so far, nothing shocks me here. Most of 2020 goes by, and the official Twitter for the Uzumaki anime shares a couple of storyboards and also the Japanese voice cast recording in 2020. Again, this all makes sense. In my personal opinion, which is also again shaped by the hindsight of knowing everything that happened, I think the concern began brewing amongst fans when on June 15, 2021, we received confirmation from Nagahama that there was once again going to be a delay until October 2022 due to issues in the anime industry, and quote, "We had to restructure our plan from the start," but we do get a continuation of the clip from the initial teaser, but again, a brief one. Now we know at this point that Nagahama was not the series director for the entire series. He's only series director for episode 1, and we know he did the storyboards for every single episode. This is the last point in production that we get actually a video update from Nagahama. Now this is just speculation on my end, but I actually think this is the part of the project where he actually chose to leave, or he's actually fired by Adult Swim or someone on the Japanese side of this production. And I do want to name, technically we do get another video with Nagahama that happens during Christmas of 2021, sharing that Junji Ito is voicing a character in Uzumaki, and Nagahama is in this video, but again, is this pre-record? Was this actually being recorded at the time? I don't really know. It's all speculation. I don't have a good answer about when he left the project or what exactly happened. It's all speculation from this point forward. Now in June 2022, this is where I became concerned about the final project of the Uzumaki anime and what it would turn into. I actually didn't really have much faith in the project after this point because there was an official request from the production staff that the anime was indefinitely delayed. I would assume this is right before this point or exactly the point where Nagahama was officially gone for sure. And to be fair, it's also hypothetically possible that he just chose not to do any more of these video updates because of the way that fans are receiving them. It's also possible that he just stayed focusing on that first episode to make it as good as possible this entire time during production, which again seems like a lot of time to focus on one episode, but if you want it to look as good as it did, I can kind of understand if that approach was taken. I also think it's very likely that we'll never have an official update about what exactly happened with the Uzumaki anime, especially from Nagahama or anyone involved in the production, especially higher up, because I think whatever happened was truly just bad. Now let's shift to July 22nd, 2023, where we get our first extended look at the series, which is in fact the same clip that I showed earlier to highlight the strength of the animation from the first episode. And again, we have no introduction or closing from Nagahama, and Jason DeMarco confirms on Twitter that the anime is coming in 2023, or maybe this was Blue Sky at this point. And as you all know, it never does. Finally, let's shift to our last big announcement for the series, which is on July 26, 2024. We get the announcement that the Uzumaki anime will be premiering on Adult Swim on September 28th, with brand new episodes the next day on Max, or my birthday. Wow, my favorite booking, its first episode of its brand new, flashy and beautifully animated anime adaptation. What could go wrong? And in hindsight, watching this teaser is somewhat hilarious, and again, no disrespect to any of the animators on the show. Just watching this teaser here, I can clearly see some of the more rough animated scenes from the show, including most notably the bit from the lighthouse. We really aren't shown a lot, and it's all still primarily clips from that first episode, to the point where most people have the misnomer online that most of the clips that we have for the show kind of leading up to it were all from that first episode. That's clearly not the case here. But the same thing can be said for the official trailer that's released on September 5th, 2024. It's now September 29th, 2024. The majority of Uzumaki's audience were celebrating alongside me on my golden birthday, a strong premiere for the series, and our hopes were quickly dashed a week later when the internet mostly collectively turned on the series, and based on my perceptions online, a number of people tuned out of the show when the quality dropped so quickly. Now, while everything before this point is speculation, we get our first confirmation about the fears that many felt alive when watching episode 2, when Jason DeMarco named explicitly about the drop in quality that took place, and of the three choices of kind of navigating what would happen to the series. One of them was canceling the series in its entirety, which feels like really a David Zaslav type of decision. 2, which was airing episode 1 in all of its quality, not airing anything else, which I think for many people, if we didn't really know what would happen with the rest of the show, would be so controversial. Or 3, airing all 4 episodes regardless of their quality and just kind of seeing what happens, which is what actually happened. What does seem all the more interesting here is DeMarco does explicitly name that someone or at least multiple people are to blame about what happened with this series, and that's why we have the drop in quality of animation that we have here. Now, when looking at the shift of quality that happens with episode 2 and beyond, looking at everything that Jason DeMarco has said and everything that I've pieced together about what's happened to the anime industry and also just this production overall from its timeline, I want to share my thoughts on what I think actually happened. COVID had a severe effect on this production, more than will ever be admitted by anyone in this production or anyone in this industry. That is undeniable. Both in the ways that affected the overall production process of the Uzumaki anime, and also due to the dramatic increase in demand for anime that was caused because of COVID, and honestly, streaming has made anime as a whole viewed so disposably by the everyday viewer that also hasn't helped. It's also implied happening once in 2020 2021, but I truly believe that the production for Uzumaki started over at least twice, maybe a third time. I'm unsure if COVID caused a complete reset, but I strongly believe that the June 2021 delay and the June 2022 delay both led to a complete reboot or near complete reboot that caused the production to start over, at least kind of mostly. I do think some elements of the first episode carried over, but I think that's honestly it. I imagine the surviving elements of the first episode are literally everything except for Shuichi's father dying, which I believe only was shifted at the second or third attempt at the production. Now we do see the smokestack from the ash of Shuichi's father after he's being cremated, but I do think that was actually pulled from the third or fourth episode of the series and just pulled all the way back all of a sudden. That was something that shifted. That's why that's also in the quality of animation that is there, and not the same quality of animation that we got later in the series. And knowing Nagahama completed storyboards for all the episodes, I want to name my next theory. I think not everything Nagahama storyboarded made to each episode, and when a segment deviated from the storyboards, that's when we really got a reliance on the presentation of the scene in the original manga rather than developing a new segment of the storyboard, and that led to some of the poor animation that we got later on top of the poor production schedule that the show already had. And yes, I do still genuinely believe that Nagahama left the project in 2021 or early 2022. Lots of people online have attempted to falsely report that David Zaslav cut the budget for the project after seeing this falsely cited on TV tropes, which again does not have a single citation there. We have no idea what's going on here. This is all speculation, and that explains the quality shift that we had here. And while that does track for the issues that we've seen at Warner Brothers Discovery ever since he took over and because of the merger, it's a theory that I don't really grasp with all the evidence I've seen. Sure, it could have happened, but there is no definitive proof it happened. And looking at his previous track record when canceling TV shows like Infinity Train or Close Enough and pulling them off of Max, if he wanted to cut the project, he would just cancel it like many of the other animated projects that he did. And this has also led people to assume issues with the project stem solely from the American side, when there's evidence that this could have easily been an issue taking place that's reflective of the overall anime industry. And honestly, looking at all this, I think a little bit of all of this happened with this entire production. I don't think that's all too far-fetched. It's a perfect storm, a project announced before the anime boom of COVID, a project with wild expectations due to the acclaim of the original text and author, an author who became even more popular in the time since the announcement of the project, so many more eyes on this project than usual, even from those like myself not often tuned into the newest and best anime, and sky-high expectations that crashed out of the sky without the privacy of this being a low-key production that could have been forgotten like some of the other poor adaptations from Ito. It's sad this video had to be made considering how beloved Junji Ito is, how many expectations there were going to the Uzumaki anime, and how strong this all started, but then it all just fell apart. Even if we never know the exact answer of what exactly happened here, there is so much that could have gone wrong that did in fact go wrong. I'm sorry for the people who went into this episode looking for a definitive answer about what happened. I dug into every single behind the scenes footage, I watched every trailer, looked at every single production note, I looked at every single tweet, I followed every single breadcrumb trail that I could, and this is kind of my speculation about what happened, and we may never get a specific answer about what happened at all. And remember, regardless of what you think about that original anime, we still have this manga, it's still beloved, it's still amazing, it's still my favorite book of all time, and honestly, isn't that all that matters? Thank you all for tuning in. Again, like, subscribe if you're really into this kind of content, follow me on other places, and I'll see you all next time.